Well, first of all, what an amazing and rare event to have something that provides a possibility, a multidisciplinary possibility across trusts, to introduce the subject to people that haven't thought of working with it before, as well as providing something extra for those that do. How many people here have not in their clinical work, to their knowledge, worked with someone with a severe or profound disability? So in fact, we are speaking to a group that have got experience and have come for a refresher then. Is there anybody here that hasn't worked with someone with an intellectual disability? Right. So that in itself is worthy of note. So you are a very precious minority symbol there. A lot of the things, therefore, that I'm saying are things that will be obvious to those of us that have been in this field, but there's a way that each time we're together, we can refresh ourselves of how to make it more possible to push for equal access for healthcare and for therapy. Because one of the basic myths that we find ourselves dealing with that hasn't changed that much over the years is that where someone with a disability is expressing their pain and communicating it, especially when they haven't got words available, that this is misinterpreted as being part of the disability rather than an emotional communication. So that when I started this work, and I started it in a way emotionally long before I joined the workshop at the Tavistock Clinic where Jean and I met, because it turned out my maternal grandmother had a mild learning disability, although it was called, wasn't it a shame women in those days didn't get educated, and she had the trauma of being a refugee. She was illiterate, but in fact my other grandmother was illiterate, and Nan had a learning disability. And by sheer, not just coincidence, my lovely father became a professor of disability, was the first head teacher to force his staff to give up the cane as an educational instrument, and wrote the book No Child is Ineducable in the 1960s that led to the Warnock Report. And he said the best start in working with learning disability is to have an illiterate mother and a learning disabled mother-in-law. So I'm proudly starting from that position, therefore. But where it came to severe behavioural communications, what shocked me immediately as a therapist entering this field was that where someone was walking up and down, banging their head, pacing up and down, where the Royal Society for the Protection against Cruelty to Animals knew that this was a sign of trauma and hypervigilance when animals did this. When it came to humans, there was no understanding that this was a communication of pain, of anger, of not being understood. And all sorts of exhausting programs were set up in America of a really cruel kind, squirting lemon juice in people's eyes that poked their eyes, using electric cattle prods. Luckily, the behaviourism that we got in England was of a humane kind that was reward-based, not punishment-based, which was the American tradition. But it was very hard to get people to think there was meaning in it. Susanna Isaacs-Elmhurst, now sadly dead, an independent group psychoanalyst who trained with Winnicott, went along to a learning disability residential home for children, saw a boy sitting outside banging his head, and she walked up to him and said, why on earth are you doing that? And he stopped forever. I've tried it since, it never worked for me. But the point was the beauty of this, that often out of generosity, workers accept the behaviour they are traumatically taking in every day and don't get a space to have a question. Why are you doing that? There is no gene, there is no handicap gene that says I must wake up and poke my eyes out, bite my hands, rock, bang my head. So there can be a variety of reasons why. And in therapy, we often try the whole shopping list. Oh my goodness, that's you banging your head. I wonder why. Does it help when you do that? Does it stop any voices you're hearing or any noise? Is there a thought in your head that's hard to turn to words? There's all sorts of possibilities. And even if someone hasn't got an expressive vocabulary, somewhere inside they can pick up from our tone that we're curious about them. Some of the myths that I've found helpful to try and dispel exactly come from that, which is not ascribing anything to the disability other than the fact that because of it, someone isn't functioning at the level other people without that disability do. That whilst of course it makes somebody more likely to have other psychiatric conditions and a comorbidity of all kinds of things, that's perfectly natural, just as it's natural for someone that's gone through extreme trauma who hasn't got a disability to also be borderline, dissociative, have complex post-traumatic states. In a way, the more rotten things we're landed with, the less surprising it is that we should have a range of disturbed communications because we're trying to do well with a rotten experience. But if we start at the beginning, there is a procreation myth that needs to be dispelled. Nearly everybody I've ever worked with a disability in therapy has expressed through words or drawing that they must have done something bad in utero to come out wrong. And in mothers' groups of pregnant women, there is this primitive feeling of having caused, if the baby's born with a disability, will it have been because of something I did wrong? These sorts of emotional myths take on power in different cultures where in fact the mother especially is blamed. She consorted with the devil. She must have had ugly thoughts in her mind, that something damaging was going on in her life and she's caused it. We tend to think of a child as the nation's child until they come out with a difference that's not wanted. Then suddenly they're your child, which is no different to two parents having an argument and saying, your daughter said this, your son said that we all dissociate. And there is a massive dissociation over the shared responsibility for every child in the country. That when someone is pregnant and they think all sorts of thoughts that they hope they'll never remember again for the rest of their life, did the fact that that act of lovemaking that got me pregnant was lousy and wasn't very loving, will that affect the baby? I ate a potato with a spot on it. Did that mean I was trying to damage the baby? I've scrubbed the whole house out and I've been cleaning and going ferocious over that. Am I trying to kill the baby? Is it really mine or is it my mother's? All sorts of primitive things that women say the moment the baby's born and doesn't have a disability. There's not only the pleasure that the baby is okay, it's the removal of the primitive unconscious processes everybody goes through. Like if you leave your purse, keys or diary somewhere in a moment of madness and you go back and it's still there and you love the whole world and you think it will last because they didn't join in with it. So we've got to consider whatever age we enter this dynamic, that there are primitive things left inside the families often where the child is born with the disability. Then what's the child picking up? I love this sort of puppet for just demonstrating a loved baby that is sure everybody is delighted to wake up and see him or her, and takes in and internalizes all that love. And that's the basis of anyone's self-esteem. But if you're born with a disability, what are you taking in? Unless you have a visual problem, we are who we see looking at us. The mirror of mother's eyes, father's eyes, the street's eyes, the world's eyes, give us a sense of who we are. So if we all think of mothers wheeling out their baby with Down syndrome, for example, for the first time, and everybody coming round to look at the new baby with a smile, and then the smile changes and there's pity, fear, is it catching? Will I get it? Excessive sentimentality. What is the baby taking in every day, even where the baby is lucky enough to have a parent who really loves him or her? That doesn't counteract the societal internalization. So we get the myth, aren't Down syndrome children happy? We would see that as racist if it was applied to any other group. And yes, someone with Down syndrome can be more genuinely loving and happy than other people in their home, or not. But this assumption around Down syndrome, this myth, creates the smiling faces of the child and their carers. We all get sucked into it at times, either becoming smiling Pollyannas that are going to make everybody happy and it's going to be a lovely day, or we're rigid behaviourists. We're going to have 10 minutes of physiotherapy, then you're going to go there for your speech, then you're going to do this. All a defence against the pain of difference. And if there isn't support to be able to cry or be sad, we can't be surprised, as one teacher in a school for profoundly disabled children said, we've got all these timetables and outcomes, and I'm looking around a whole class banging their heads. I know they're all in pain. I get no on-site therapy or anything, and I just feel like crying all the time, so I'd rather not notice what's going on. And ditto for a hospital ward. So losing meaning because of fear is a huge issue. So we have the myth, if you like, that we are all in charge of procreation, rather than the Khalil Gibran kind of concept, your child is the child that life has allowed through you. We find a way of blaming the parents for the child when we haven't got resources, so that care in the community is often mum aged 80 with 60-year-old severely disabled son. And professionals, even professionals in this field with children with a disability, are having to see in their professional life as well as their personal life the guilt and shame and wish to blame out of lack of resources. So if we consider then the myth that the parent has caused it that needs to be dispelled, we then need to look at the political side that we're all partly responsible for, which is, of course, that where there is trauma to the mother in pregnancy, where there is war, where there is domestic abuse, where there is self-medication through drugs and alcohol because of unworked through trauma, that the child is more likely to be born with a disability. In America, there is the term violence-induced mental handicap because of the knowledge of how that can go together quite separately from the small percentage of a genetic inheritance which affects every social class. And I've also been struck by the tragedy of upper class and middle class children and adults with a disability who are finding themselves the only person from their culture in a day centre full of behaviour that's got nothing to do with disability, but has got to do with poverty, discrimination, violence, and aggressive behaviour learnt to try and cope with living in violent homes. So we're dealing with very complex myths here. So we then come to the myth of the ignorance in the person with the disability, that isn't it lucky? I wouldn't like to know I was like that. At least she doesn't understand, poor dear. She can't speak or walk. And of course, there isn't such a thing as ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is extremely painful, and it's not being aware that emotional intelligence, which was a term John Stokes and I coined at the Tavistock 10 years before Daniel Goleman, but we still haven't written to tell him, that emotional intelligence coexists with whatever the functional level is. And somebody knows what is being poured into them, what toxic things are there. When I went to Leros, at the point where the conditions of those with a disability was noted on that island, and saw naked, shit-smeared groups of people with disability chained together in case they had an epileptic fit or fell down, children that couldn't walk because they'd been tied to their beds and there was no physiotherapy. And I'd sort of gone to do a consultation and I'd prepared a sentence in Greek. Hello, I'm Valarie, I'm from England, and sort of trying to deal with the wish to just run out and scream, made my way to one group and held a hand out and said my sentence, and a man with Down syndrome moved himself out of this pile of naked bodies and shook my hand. And then I turned round slowly, trying not to run, walking out, then out into the fresh air and trying not to be sick, and then scrubbing my hands and scrubbing my hands and scrubbing my hands. And a year later, when I went back, and there was the first community home in Athens, and there was this man dressed to greet me. And in the therapy group, to deal with their guilt at leaving other people on that island in those conditions, he said, I remember you. You shook my hand in Leros. And it was one of those moments that will stay for life. But we as humans can incubate all our hope, our humanness, and hide it till it's safe. And what's amazed Jean and I in therapy and others here is where someone has a profound multiple disability, no words, no capacity to even be measured for any intellectual anything. The changes that come in therapy through the emotional internalizing of a different kind of relationship. So that takes us to dispelling the myth that therapy doesn't work with profound disability. And at St George's Hospital, with now Baroness Professor Sheila Hollins, but when Sheila was the consultant, and we did our research outcomes of treatment, there was no difference in improvement between profound multiple disability and mild disability. There were just slight tweaks to the therapy we were used to using with other groups. And in fact, I now use what I've learned through disability work in all my work, because I think that's better therapy, which is more transparency, more affect, emotional affect on our faces and tones of voice, and more transparency. For example, the normal therapeutic comment, "Where are you going on your holiday, Valarie?" And we've all been brought up that have done psychodynamic therapies. I wonder where you think I'm going. And that's the usual. With disability, it was the same kosher meaning, but done differently. "Goodness, you're getting brave at daring to think more about me, and it's no secret where I'm going, but you're the important person here, and what you guess about me is helping us understand things about you more." And I had my ghastly experience of being at an airport to see my daughter coming back from holiday, was there with my husband and son, and never happened ever before or since, a woman with severe learning disability with her carer in the same empty airport space. I whispered the magic word, "patient." My family dutifully disappeared. I walked up to her, said hello. She went away with well-trained foster mother, greeted my family, off we went. We have the group next week. "Why you hide me away from your man and your children, Valarie? You ashamed of me?" And these sorts of moments that change us for life. So the last point to give you is a wonderful moment that came after 4 years of group therapy, where a woman with a severe disability came into the room crying. And she said, "Boys on my estate hurt me, threw stones at me, called out, 'Spastic, spastic.' And I said to them, 'You're right, I am a spastic. And you're lucky boys that you're not. But you're rude boys, and I'm not rude.'" And we all gave her a huge round of applause. But you think of the emotional brilliance of that she could say, "Whatever it is you call me, I'm the other you're frightened of." She didn't say, "I'm not a spastic, I'm a person with an intellectual disability with comorbid this," and she accepted the word they used for her as other. And she also acknowledged that they were lucky. She didn't say, "It's absolutely wonderful having a disability, I'm so grateful." She could honestly say that, but they were rude boys and she wasn't rude. Now, I can't think of in groups of people bullied for ordinary children, gifted children, adults. I think that was the most brilliant response I'd heard. So when we do this work, we get those moments amidst the weeks and weeks of no apparent change that transform us and transform everyone. So here's to all of us dispelling the myths for our colleagues and having the strength to properly understand, again, a lovely comment from America, that all of us are only the temporarily unimpaired. Thank you.